Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. We'd like to thank you for attending this session of our PRD Pilot Records Database informational session. This is actually webinar. This one is for managing user roles. We have our PRD team on the call with us, and that includes Julie Powell, Scott McLean, your assistant program manager, Stacy Smith, and your program manager, Chris Morris. I'm going to hand it over to Chris. Please be aware that we are going to answer questions using our Q&A function in Zoom. So if you can hold them to the end, that's great. Perhaps you can answer that way, but otherwise it will be answered in the chat, and we will answer all your questions eventually. Thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Amy and Alex. Appreciate that. And welcome everyone to our webinar. We're super glad that you could join us today. And as Amy mentioned, we're going to be talking about user roles today, and we'll go into quite a bit of what's available to operators and what kind of user roles that they have available to them. That's really what this presentation is about. We do touch a little bit on the proxy user roles at the end of the presentation, because those are actually pretty similar in a lot of respects, but we'll go into those a little bit as well. So that being said, let's go ahead and kind of get started. We do have a lot to cover, and we want to make sure we save some time for questions at the end. So Amy already mentioned a little bit about, who's on the call. Of course, we're from the Aviation Data Systems branch in Oklahoma City, and my name is Chris Morris. I am the PRD Program Manager. Stacy Smith is also on the call. She's the Assistant Program Manager, and then we have the rest of the PRD support team. Those are the folks that you reach when you send emails to prd.faa.gov, and that really is the best way to get help if you have any questions about the program, technical questions or about user roles or whatever. That's the place to get support. So Amy did mention to you about questions if you have any, kind of how we're going to accept them today. So the rule of thumb is if you have a question, just enter it in the Q&A box, which is part of the webinar controls. And either someone from the PRD support team will respond to your question, like, today, real time, or they may save your question and we may answer it at the end of the presentation if we think it could apply to a lot of folks, if it's a really common question. And then also, if we don't get to your question today, then we'll be responding to them by email in the next few days. But we always do our best to respond to everyone. It just may be a couple days. So, and if some time goes by and you just don't get your question answered, please drop us an email at that support email that I mentioned. This presentation file will be available at prd.faa.gov. We try to post all of our previous webinars in the resource section so that you have them. And another big reason that you might want to do that is because there are links and things in this presentation, like web links. And of course, they're not very useful to you. Just as you view it live here in the webinar, it's only going to be really helpful if you download the presentation, then that web link is going to work. So that's really a pretty big reason that you'll want to grab this presentation file once it gets posted. It usually gets posted in a few days. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's kind of the overview of what we're going to discuss. So we'll talk about user roles in general, kind of some things that apply to all the different users. Then we'll go into more specifically the different types of operator user roles that are available. And of course, once we cover, what's available and what they do, why you might want them, then we'll cover how do you request those roles, and then how do they get approved? What's the actual process for that? We're going to do a demo for that part of it to show you how you would actually request, or not request, but how you would, how certain users at operators can approve roles. So of course, that's the demonstration there that we'll talk about. And it's also important to note that we'll also talk about how to reject users, because sometimes you might get an application for a user role that someone submitted in error. We see that a fair amount. And also you might have just people that leave the company So you'll have a need that you'll want to be able to deactivate those roles, later on when it's appropriate. Then we'll touch on the proxy roles. And then finally, we'll have some time for questions. So that's the general overview of today. So let's go over some just high level roles suggestions that apply to basically all the roles. So every person that wants to access the PRD system, regardless of the role, you have to have your own personal MyAccess account. So MyAccess is a user authentication system that the FAA uses, and it actually is used to allow access to a few different websites, not just PRD, but PRD is probably the biggest website that's using the MyAccess system. But it's really important that you understand that especially as a new user to PRD, it's kind of a two-step process. You have to create your MyAccess account if you don't already have one, and then you would register in PRD for whatever role is appropriate. We have a tip there that you should use your personal email account versus a work email account. And the reason for that is this MyAccess account is intended to be for you as an individual, not for you as an employee of any particular operator. So if you leave that employer and you go work somewhere else in a couple of years or whatever, you don't want to lose access to your account. So that's why we recommend that your MyAccess account, because it gets associated to your email, that it be a personal email and not one with work. Another really important thing to keep in mind is that you'll only ever have a single MyAccess account. If you add additional roles in PRD, like maybe you work for multiple operators, or maybe you work for just one operator, but you have multiple roles within that company, you do not need a different MyAccess account for every role, just the one. So it's real important that you don't create multiple MyAccess accounts, because that will create confusion, and it results in people not being able to have access to the system properly and that sort of thing. So really best to avoid ever creating a duplicate or a second MyAccess account. I already mentioned that MyAccess is used with other websites. So something that is just became available in the last few days is a MyAccess self-service web portal. And if you have ever had to struggle with MyAccess with something like changing your email address or resetting your multi-factor system, like Google Authenticator, for example, and you used to have to call the help desk and go through that process, there's now a website where you can do this all on your own. And that is a link there on the screen. I will give you the URL here in just a second. If you just want to type it in, you'll have it. But you can change your email, you can change your password. I mentioned your multi-factor settings, and you can even change your name that's associated to the account. And it might sound funny. What do you mean change my name? But that actually happens a fair amount with pilots, because pilots will create a MyAccess account, but they might have a slightly different last name, for example, on their cell phone bill than what's printed on their FAA pilot certificate. This can create problems in PRD. So it's not unusual for pilots to say, I need to change my name in my MyAccess account. Anyway, the portal will let you do it. Of course, if you try a name change, it's going to make you go back through the ID verification process again. So there's the URL if you think that might be a useful website for you to try. Of course, if you contact PRD support and we think, this is a good opportunity for them to use the self-service portal, we're going to give you that URL as well. Another really important thing about MyAccess and PRD is that the PRD support team is not the same as the MyAccess support team. And I know that it doesn't always seem obvious, because most people just kind of assume that MyAccess and PRD, they're the same thing. But they're actually not. They're two different programs. It's just that PRD uses My Access for user access. So the PRD support team, there's only certain things that we can do to help you if you have problems with your My Access account. There's just some things we've learned through experience. So we'll try and assist you or point you in the right direction. But don't be too surprised if we identify your challenge that you're having and we say, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to call the help desk because we just can't help you beyond this. So anyway, so that's just an important point. The last thing I want to say about these accounts in general is that if you have trouble with the ID verification process, which is required when you create a new My Access account, if you get stuck, go ahead and email prd.faa.gov, and we might not be able to fix the reason that you're stuck, but we can at least explain to you your options, because there are alternate processes available, different paths that can be used. If you get stuck, go ahead and email us and we'll try and help you out, even though, like I said before, we're not the same support team, but we might have some tricks that could be helpful to you. So those are just kind of some top tips, for My Access and stuff. So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about PRD. So at this point, we can just make believe that you already have a My Access account, that you've already got that scored away. So let's talk about what different roles are available in PRD and what they're for and kind of how do you get them and that sort of thing. So the first role that we always like to start with, because it's like the most important role for industry, is the Authorized Responsible Person role. We just call it RP for short. It's obviously much easier to say. So the RP role is the only role that's required by Part 111. And basically, to paraphrase what's on the screen here, is that Part 111 says that every applicable operator will have registered a responsible person in the PRD system by September 8th, 2021, or within 30 days of initiating service. All right. So if you're a new operator, for example, so if you're thinking to yourself, we don't have that, here it is, mid-July, if you can believe it, mid-July 22, and you're thinking, I don't think that we have a responsible person registered in PRD. The best thing to do is just to go ahead and get someone registered in PRD. That's the best thing to do. So, maybe this will be helpful to you, these kind of instructions. So another important thing about the RP is there can only be a single RP registered for an operator at a time. So you can't have multiple RPs, only one. A company can switch RPs. You can have, Fred for 6 months, and then Fred says, "No, I don't want to do this anymore. Jerry wants to do it." Well, that's fine. Jerry can register as RP, and Jerry can get approved, but then Fred is going to lose his RP role because you're only allowed to have one at a time. And the PRD folks, we're not going to call and say, "Hey, did you mean to kick Fred off?" We're just going to execute the change. So that's an important point, is you can only have one at a time. And also, registrations for the RP are approved at the FAA level. And there are also some eligibility requirements. Not just anyone can be approved as the RP. Generally speaking, although there's, of course, a lot of details where it makes a difference, but generally speaking, you need to be a Part 119 position holder. If Part 119 doesn't apply to you and you're like, what is that? What's Part 119? If that doesn't apply to you, then essentially a management personnel, okay, are the ones that can get approved as an RP. So we have a process that we go through to figure out if someone is, can be approved or not, but we'll handle that, and we'll usually work with the requester to get it sorted out. So the other thing about the RP is they can do everything in PRD that's possible for an operator to do. So once you get approved as a responsible person, you have all the functionality that would be available to industry. So You do not need to register for any additional roles. You don't need to ask for anything else. We do see this from time to time where RPs will register for other roles, thinking that they need them, but they don't. You already have all the permissions that you need. So it's best not to register for any additional roles. Of course, that's for the same, I'm talking about for the same operator. It's not unusual that an RP might work for multiple operators. So, a single person could be an RP for multiple companies. You could have multiple RP roles. But within the same company, you don't need any extra roles. So hope that kind of clears that one up. Now, we don't cover a lot of FAQs in this webinar. In fact, this is the only one, but it just comes up so frequently. I wanted to mention it. And this is for RPs that will often contact us and they say, I'm logging in to look at pilot records and the drop-down list does not say responsible person. They only see, like you see on the screen here, they see authorized consumer and they think something's wrong because I'm not a consumer, I'm a responsible person. This is actually completely normal. And this is just the way that the system behaves. You can think of it as, even though you are a responsible person, you do have a consumer role that's been issued to you. And so sometimes you'll be using that consumer role when you're looking at pilot records. So that's really common that people say, something's wrong with my account. And we say, no, it's fine. This is normal. If you happen to log in through the tools button at prd.faa.gov, like this example shows, you will see authorized responsible person. And if you're wondering what does Chris mean when he says log in from the tools button or the view records button, this is at prd.faa.gov. And these are basically the two, we call them buttons. They don't really look like buttons, but it's the way that you launch into the application. And it depends on what you want to do. So anyway, hopefully that FAQ discussion will help out some RPs that might be having questions about that. So that's kind of it on the RP role. Let's move on to the user manager. This is another very popular role. And so a user manager, or just UM, how we can write that a bit shorter. The user manager, they're allowed to edit users for the same operator. That's basically all they can do. Like they don't look at pilot records. They don't report pilot records. The only thing that they do is they manage users for the company. That does include proxy users. We'll discuss proxies here in a minute. So this is a great way if a responsible person at a large operator isn't really the right person to be managing user roles in PRD. For example, the director of operations of a major airline, it might not be appropriate that they would be the ones to have to approve users into the system. So if they will let one of the employees become a user manager, they can delegate that to the user manager. And that way they have someone else in the company that can take care of those activities. You can have multiple user managers if you want. The user managers are approved by the RP. So the FAA doesn't get involved in that, which is great. So so as a user manager, if you want to become a user manager, you register at the website. I'll show you where you can get some technical information here in just a second. You register, and then that request has to be made active by the RP. Okay. You'll have access then by the tools button, which I showed you a couple slides back. And again, you don't have any access to records. You can't view records, that sort of thing. Now you might be thinking, what if I wanted to be a user manager and be able to look at records? You can do that. Of course you can. You would just need to also request the consumer role as well. We'll talk about that more. So let's go to the next one. Well, this is a good point. I should mention it. Operators can have as many user managers as they need. You might just need one, you might need five. It's up to you, to have what you need. So the next one to talk about is the authorized user contributor. I know it's kind of a mouthful. Maybe think in your head, authorized user hyphen contributor, or we just call it contributor for short. Just, we're just chatting about it because otherwise it gets really confusing. So a contributor is a role where someone can report pilot records into PRD for their operator. So again, imagine your Part 119 Director of Operations. It's probably not the right person to be reporting pilot records every day into the system. They probably want to assign maybe a handful of folks that can be contributors, and they can log into PRD, as part of their daily functions and report records. So that's the purpose of having, a contributor account. Again, they're approved by the responsible person, or a user manager can also process those requests. And they would log in via the tools button. The tools button is the button that you use to report records. So that's the one that you would use. And of course, you can have other roles as you need them. I kind of implied this a couple slides back. So if, you might be a user manager who also needs to be able to report pilot records. So you could be a user manager and you can be a contributor. Okay, so you can stack these roles up however it is that you need them to give you the right set of tools, for you. And of course, you can have as many contributors as you need to get the job done. So the last role here to talk about is the consumer role. We've had these for a while, especially considering that as of December of last year, the only way to get the FAA records portion under PRIA was through the PRD system, and you have to be a consumer to be able to do that. Of course, I mentioned RPs already had this ability, but if you needed extra employees to be able to look at records, they would need to be consumers. So again, this is a way for the RP to delegate this function, and it's approved by the responsible person or the user manager. And they would log in via the view records button. That's about the only, you say, well, what activity are you using under tools versus view records? Basically, user management and reporting records and looking at reports, that stuff's all under tools. The only thing that you'll really do under the view records button is, well, viewing records. so that's that one. Okay, so let me cover that. And of course, you can have as many consumers as you need to get the job done. So that's kind of a high level. Now, I think this chart will be useful to you. I'm not going to go over all of these help files here in the webinar, but they will be useful to you. So what we have here in this table is you have the roles listed out on the left-hand side, and then just a short reminder of what functions that they have. And then I have in the third column a reminder of who actually approves those roles, who goes in there and actually pushes the buttons to get them approved. And then the last thing is the help files. And I know this isn't useful just looking at it on screen, but when you download this presentation file, these are web links that you can click on, and it will take you to step-by-step directions. So if you want to be an authorized consumer and you don't know how to start, you can click on that how to register link, and it will take you to the PDF that steps you through it. Step 1, step 2, it just walks you through it. And if you don't want to wait for the webinar to look at these help files, they're already available at prd.faa.gov. Just go over to the resources section and you'll see these step-by-steps, how to do these different functions, okay? And of course, if you get stuck, you're not quite sure what to do with it, email us at prd.support@faa.gov, and we'll happily, go over it a bit, okay, to help you out. So, so I want to do a little demo now. So we'll kind of look at the application and kind of how it how the process works. I'm also going to give you some tips and try to keep you away from some common errors that we see. So the demo I'm going to show you is how you would approve a user. So let's just make believe that this would be something performed by a responsible person or a user manager, right? Those are the only two folks that can approve users. But of course, you start at prd.faa.gov, click on the tools button to start in. Of course, you'll have to log in through your My Access account. And then once you arrive at the role selection page, you'll need to select your role in case you have multiples, because you might have multiple roles in the system. But you have to be at least a responsible person or a user manager to be able to edit, accounts. And then if you have roles for multiple operators, you'll have to also select that. So you can see in this example, we've got authorized responsible person, and then test applicant for 135 is the company. And then you just hit select and it logs you in. So when it logs you in, the page that you'll land on automatically is this security managed users page. And there's a table there that says pending approvals. So it's meant to show you kind of without you having to look too hard for it. It's meant to show you right up front any registrations that are pending. So this would be other employees that have registered for roles within your system that need to be processed, either approved or rejected, okay, because that might be appropriate. I will also mention that we do see, maybe not so much now, it used to happen more often when PRD was first new, but we were seeing a lot of pilots that would in error make application to have access for particular airlines, and it's probably just because they didn't really know the process. A lot of times the pilot was trying to release their records or grant consent, and they got confused and ended up submitting a registration request to the airline. So we used to see that more, but you might still see it where you'll see basically just random people, which I know sounds funny, but you'll see random people with pending approvals. And you're like, who are these people? They don't even work for us. It happens. And that's why it's happening, because people are making those mistakes. So you might find that you need to reject those folks, so I'll show you how to do that, kind of here in this process. But anyway, so you can see here that there's a table at the bottom that says pending approvals. This is kind of a zoomed in view of it, so if you wanted to approve this account, sorry for the redaction. It's just, I didn't, some of the stuff here is test data, but some of it could be close to real names. We like to redact it. So if you want to edit this particular user, you can see they are requesting to be an authorized consumer. So you check the little box by their name, and then you hit edit pending approval, and it's going to open the editing screen where you can either approve it or you could reject it. And I'll try and show you both scenarios here so that you see it. So the first thing that you should do, let's say you want to approve this person as an authorized consumer, you want to make sure that the user status is set to active. This one's pretty important. If you don't check it, it could possibly say pending approval. And if you forget to set it to active, then they still won't have access to the website for your company. So you want to go ahead and set that to active. There are cases where it will already say active, and that's fine. You can just leave it alone. But anyway, make sure that's set to active. And then the second thing is in this roles table where you can see it says roles and it says authorized consumer. You want to make sure that the role status says active. It'll, in this example, it would have said pending approval is what it would have said. And so you would want to change that to active. And then you would just set the effective date to today, whatever day it is that you're doing this activity. And this one's really important. If you don't listen to anything that Chris says for this whole webinar, please listen to this one. The expiration date is a little wonky. I wouldn't use it. Just leave it empty. We have found a lot of people that enter expiration dates, and they have the best of intentions because they say, well, I'm going to set an expiration date for 2 years or 6 months or whatever. It always ends up being problematic. So my suggestion is leave the expiration date empty. We will be making some software updates in the future to maybe make that a little bit more clear how it behaves and that sort of thing. But that's my top tip, is no expiration dates when you're activating a role. There are some times you'll have to put a date in there, but not when you're making a role active. And then you just click save. And when you do that, you'll get a pop-up that says the record's been updated. And then the page will reload, kind of like this one. And you'll see now it doesn't have anybody down there in pending approvals, because we processed that one. And so now there's no one else to process. So that's basically how you do it. So just active, and then top tip, no expiration date. If you have, issues with making someone active, or, because there are some edge cases where the system won't let you do that or whatever, just email us, okay, and we can help you through it. So the next thing I want to show you is what if you wanted to reject someone, like they were a pending. It's like just that random person I mentioned that you're like, who is this person and why are they wanting access to our records? It could just be an error, or maybe an employee has left the company and it's time to deactivate their account. So I want to show you how to do that. So you need to search for the user account, and you can either use the search fields. So you can search by name. You can see that you can do first name or last name. You can search by what type of roles. Like you could say, show me all of the authorized consumers. Or you can just leave all that blank and just hit the search button, and it will just show you all the users associated with your company. So kind of in this example, that's kind of what we get. If I don't enter any search parameters, I just say, show me everybody. So I just hit search, but that means you got to kind of filter through the list a bit. So in this example, we want to edit this user that's in this dark color bar. It's got my name on it. Well, actually, it doesn't have mine. I edited it last anyway. So the way that you edit this user, once you find them in the list, is you just check the box by their name, and then you click the edit button, and that will bring up the editing page, which looks very, very similar to the one that you just saw during the approval page. So this discussion about how to make someone inactive is got a really important part to it. So the first thing, I'm going to go ahead and mention it, even though I don't think I have an arrow pointing to it, is the user status says active, and you want to leave that active. I know that sounds counterintuitive because you're like, no, I don't. I don't want this person, in PRD for me. Well, that user status is not what's going to change their ability to access your system. Okay, so leave the user status active, and you can just go straight down to the role status. That's the one that you want to change. So go to role status and change it to inactive. There's an awful lot of choices in there. There's pending and active and rejected and denied and locked. There's a lot of choices. Don't let all those choices throw you. Just focus on active or inactive. That's really the easiest thing to do. So you just change their role status to inactive, and you will have to set, I know it doesn't really sound right, but you're going to set an expiration date. You can really think of it as, the system's recording when they could no longer have access. Okay, so you put the expiration date as today, and then you click save, and that will, you'll again get the pop-up that says record's been successfully updated. And then, that inactivates their role, and they will no longer have access. Now, it is important to note, but I don't want this to throw you off, is that even though you inactivated that user, they're still going to show up in your managed users list. You can see in this example, it says user status active, which is good. Remember, that's what I said. I said, don't change that one, leave that one active. But then it says role status, authorized consumer, inactive. So you can see that person used to have a consumer role, but they no longer have a consumer role. And we're working on making some software edits so that this list can be a little bit cleaner for you, so that you don't have to hunt through these inactive people if you just want to see like just active. So we're working on making that update to make it a little bit more user friendly. All right, so pop quiz time. I hope you guys like quizzes. Of course, just on your honor, right? So here's the first question. Of the 4 different roles shown on the right, if you wanted to register your operator in PRD to meet the Part 111 requirement, which of these roles would you need to register to meet that regulatory requirement? So giving you just a couple of seconds. The correct answer is RP, right? You probably all got that correct. That's probably pretty self-explanatory. So the RP role is that one. So here's another question for you. What role would you need if you needed to review pilot records when hiring a pilot? So of the 4 choices, which one would you need? It's kind of a 2-part answer. You could either be a responsible person, the RP can look at records, or you could be an authorized consumer. That role can also look at pilot records. So I got another one for you. What if you wanted to report records to PRD? What role would you need for that one? You probably getting the hang of it. The RP, of course, they get that function, or you could be a contributor. Technically, it's authorized user contributor, right? It's kind of a mouthful. We'll just call it contributor. Okay, I think I have a couple more questions. What if you wanted to edit users for your operator? Approve people or reject people? That one's kind of a no-brainer. Responsible person or a user manager can both do those activities. And then I have a bonus question. What if you work for an air carrier and you need to edit proxy users? We'll talk about proxy next. That's the next topic. So that could be an RP or again, a user manager. Either one of these folks can not only edit their own users for their own company, but if there's a proxy associated with your operator, you can also edit those proxy users as well. You don't quite have quite as much control. It's basically on or off for those folks. But that actually kind of leads us over to the proxy part of the discussion. So we're not going to go into as great detail here because some of it's actually quite similar, but I just want to give you just a high level. Now, so a proxy, if you're wondering, under PREA, we called these folks designated agents or DAs. And essentially, it's a third party who is hired by an operator to assist them with various, usually under PREA, it was requesting records as part of the background search. Of course, under PRD, that still applies. You're still collecting records, but you might also have them assist you with reporting records into PRD. So a proxy is just a third party that can do these activities, and PRD is designed to support that relationship. So yeah, I kind of already mentioned that part. Proxies can both look at records as well as report records. So let me show you this. This last bullet point's important. So the operator, even though you might hire a third party or a proxy to upload records or collect records to do the background hiring check, the operator always retains the responsibility for compliance. You can't offload that responsibility. So, all right. So I want to explain this little bit to you about the relationship between proxies and the proxy employees and kind of how you get someone approved as a proxy. So here's an example. You can see on the left, you have ABC Airways, and ABC Airways has an authorized responsible person, which is good. And they may have other users that I just didn't draw. right? They might have user managers and they might have consumers and contributors, but it's not really relevant for this discussion. So then you have the proxies are us, right? You have the proxy company on the right-hand side. So the proxy company, the only way that they can get access to the records for ABC Airways is proxies are us has to have a proxy responsible person approved. So it's very similar to the RP. It's just a proxy RP. But the approval is a little bit different because the approval right now is coming from both the FAA as well as the operator. So if there's an employee at Proxies R Us and they want to be a proxy for ABC Airways, what happens is they make registration in the PRD system as a proxy RP, and that request goes to our office, PRD support at faa.gov. It goes to us, and then we check to make sure that that person is actually an employee of Proxies R Us, right? Is it someone that works for Proxies R Us? And then we also check with ABC Airways and say, hey, ABC Airways, and specifically this person wants to be your proxy responsible person. Is that something that you want to approve? And the ABC Airways can say, yes, we approve, or no, we don't want them looking at our records. Once they let us know, then we hit the right buttons to either approve or reject that relationship. Once that relationship is established, ABC Airways has pretty good control regarding how long that occurs, or if they want to stop that behavior, because the RP can log in and completely sever that relationship, or the RP can log in and maybe just disable some of these. Like, see, there's a proxy consumer here, there's a proxy contributor. They can decide, no, that person we don't want authorized. Maybe they know something, I don't know. But they have the ability to do that, to control access. We are making a software update soon. Soon probably means December. But anyway, we're making a software update to where in the future, these approvals, these proxy RP approvals, won't actually come through the FAA. It'll go straight to the ABC Airways, and ABC Airways will be the one to just say yes or no. They'll do it inside the system, and the FAA won't have to be involved. So that's an update that's coming. So otherwise, they have the same general roles available. Let me see if I can go ahead and, yeah, here it is. So, proxy consumers, proxy user managers, proxy contributors. The only thing that's really kind of important to keep in mind is that every relationship between the proxy and the operator has to have this proxy responsible person. And, of course, a proxy company might provide records for multiple companies. So they would need to have multiple proxy responsible persons approved, one for every operator, so it's a little bit of a burden to set up, we acknowledge, because there's kind of a little bit of paperwork involved, but it's the best approach to keep things isolated, so that folks that do things for one airline, there's no crossover into permissions for another airline, if that makes sense. So anyway, so that's kind of the high level on the proxies. I'm not going to go into any more really detail than that. Okay, so that's probably good. So kind of wrapping up here, we do have several resources I want to highlight. And again, these will be web links that you can use when you download this presentation file. So I'm not going to read through those, but that should be helpful web links for you. The next webinar is on July 28th, and it's all for pilots. It will describe in detail how to grant consent. It'll describe how to enter historical employer information. And probably most interesting, because it's the newest function, is it will explain to pilots how to request corrections to records or request missing records. and how to dispute pilot records. So we'll be covering all that stuff strictly for pilots. Of course, anyone can attend. If you're not a pilot, you just want to have an idea how the system works for those folks, that's fine. Still welcome to attend. So with that being done, let's move over to the questions. Stacy, if you're on, did we have any questions to discuss here?
We have one question from, we have a couple of questions. One question from Christian Pop regarding the API. With the API in the future as an air carrier, will we be able to automate the download PRD records, or is the API limited to company records upload?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the API, as far as I'm aware, is focusing, especially initially, is focusing on receiving records. So it's meant to automate the reporting of pilot records. And it's not meant to automate the receiving of pilot records. I'm not saying that that's not something that the developers are thinking about. It's just not something that they've shared with us. I don't think it's on the plans, especially short term. You know, the real functionality that we need to get running in that API is going to be the ability to upload bulk records. So, but you never know. Maybe in the future it could support, you know, something like that. So we'll see. Good question. Anything else, Stacy?
And then we have another question here, and I think this is in regards to let's see. Will email notifications be included in future program updates? And I think this is as far as notifying the RP and user management of its presence.
I'm kind of hearing two questions. I'm kind of hearing maybe a question of will just generally will industry get emails about software updates and things, and then maybe the other question is, does PRD send emails about certain activities? So I'm not sure exactly which the question is, but let me just try and touch both of them real quickly. So we do try and send emails about, you know, software updates and things, but really the best place to get it is prd.faa.gov. You know, we have a system message banner there at the very top, and we try to post the most recent, you know, newsworthy information there, especially if we know it's generating questions or, you know, that sort of thing. But we will on occasion, if there's you know, going to be outages or that sort of thing, we will occasionally send emails to folks that subscribe to the PRD system messages. And if the question was more about, does the system notify you? The short answer is yes. It kind of depends on what the activity is. But the system does send various emails to the appropriate folks to take actions, like if there's a record request or that sort of thing. If I didn't quite understand the question, please just email us at PRD support and we'll take another shot at that one. What else you got, Stacy?
We have a question to ask if you could please go over again how to remove the expiration date on active roles.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. So if you have an active role for an active employee and you know that you've added an expiration date and now you're like, oops, we probably should try and get rid of that, which I would recommend, because it's the most inopportune moment it's going to stop working, right? So what you do is you go back to the search page that I had shown you. Let me see if I can just back this slide up and just go to that page. Sorry, this isn't very pretty when I'm just clicking through, but this will let me, if I can just get to that page, maybe this will. Okay, so if you will search for the user, just like we did kind of in this example, like editing users, find the user that you want to remove the expiration date, and then hit the edit at the bottom. And you would just leave, like here it says inactive, you would leave that active, so you don't have to change that. And then you can just delete the expiration date altogether that I've got marked here. You would just, whatever it is that you have there, I would just delete it. And sometimes PRD will insist that when you're trying to delete these expiration dates, it'll insist that you change the effective date as well. But you can just try it this way. Just delete the expiration date and hit save. If you get an error, then that means it wants you to update the effective date to today. So you would change this to today, and then you would delete that. And it's absolutely perfectly fine. If you say, oh, well, but they've been a consumer for 6 months, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change anything to change the effective date to today. So that's how you do it. If you get stuck, please just email us and we'll go over it with you. All right, what else you got, Stacy?
You know what? That actually wraps it up. We do not have any more open questions.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's pretty good timing too, because we're approaching the top of the hour. So with that being said, with all the questions resolved, I think we will wrap up the webinar. So thank you for attending. We hope you guys found it useful, and we'll see you at the next webinar for pilots. Have a good day.